And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. It is the best day of the week, not just because the weekend is almost here, but because it is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I am the Vice President of the Heartland Institute. We are an organization that has been around for 40 years, and we've been known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this very show brings you the data, the science, the truth, and when we're fortunate, some excellent guests to counter the climate alarmist narrative that you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show broadcasting anywhere. So I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And also like, share, and subscribe. And importantly, leave comments underneath this video. All those very easy to do actions convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon this program. And that gets it in front of even more people. And as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not really like the way we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS, which stands for the Climate Realism Show. And you can help us make sure that this program gets out there to the world every single week. Any support that you could give is warmly welcome and very greatly appreciated. We also want to thank today our streaming partners that help us get this show in front of more eyes. That being junkscience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. So welcome to you all, and I hope that you will follow all of these accounts on X and become a subscriber to this here show on YouTube and Rumble. I'll just search for the Heartland Institute. All right, we have a very big show today with a very special guest. But let's first welcome in our usual crew, or almost all of our usual crew. We have with us today Anthony Watts. He's a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the most influential climate website in the world, What's Up With That? And we have Linnea Lukin. She's research fellow for energy environment policy at Heartland. H. Sterling Burnett, who's usually on this show, is on vacation today. So I know he's going to be watching this either now or later. So hello, Sterling. Welcome. Welcome to you as a viewer, and welcome you guys. It's going to be a big show today.
Welcome. Thank you. Hey, I was thinking about that clip of Greta that we run at the beginning, saying it's Friday, and the occasional how dare you that we run of her. I'm thinking, given what we've seen lately, that's about the only exposure she's getting.
Yeah, on climate, that is.
How dare you?
That's right. She'll never live that down, and we will never tire of playing that little drop. So
we could probably set up a 24/7 channel with just that playing in a loop, and people would watch.
We probably would. All right. Well, we do have a big show today, and if you looked at the thumbnail for this video, our special guest today is Dr. Roy Spencer, who is one of the leading climate scientists in the world, and we're looking forward to having him on. He'll be joining us about halfway through the program. So settle in, pour a cup of coffee, get a snack. You're not going to want to miss his appearance on this program. But first, we will start, as we always do, with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Yes. Very warm, very warm. All right. So our first item here is called NOAA Alarmist Agitprop. And this came to us, Anthony Watts. This got his attention this week. So let's go over it. So Andy, if you could put on the screen that link that I shared of the new climate index from NOAA. I'm going to read a bit from it and then throw it to Anthony, who I said is a bit triggered by all of this. So reading from this is the United States Climate Reference Network USCRN, is a sustained network of high-quality weather monitoring stations across the contiguous U.S., Alaska, and Hawaii. These stations use resilient instrumentation to measure temperature, precipitation, wind speed, soil conditions, and more. The purpose of the USCRN program is to provide forecasters and researchers with a reliable series of quality-controlled observations. Stations are placed in long-term sites around the nation, which are protected from land use changes that reduce the data quality of other stations. Stations can also be combined to create indices of contiguous United States weather conditions, including our new USCRN Aggregated Climate Extremes Index, the ACE Index. Now, that was, I read there right from NOAA's post on their website. And Anthony, so this post, and especially these graphs here from NOAA, I should say, is what triggered you. So maybe you can explain to me and to our audience why that was.
Yeah, well, I've been waiting for the USCRN to become co-opted by the climate insanity, and this week was the week. The USCRN, I have been a big advocate of. Andy, would you keep that graph at the bottom there, the USCRN Aggregated Climate Extremes Index? Keep that up and magnify that a little bit. Thank you. So I've been a real proponent of this network because it's the only network in the world that has the stations set up removed away from humanity. You know, these are things that are out on the boonies. They're, far, far away from things like asphalt, concrete, jet engines, that kind of stuff. And so I've always thought that the temperature is a good representation of what is actually out there in terms of temperature instead of the other stuff. Well, they also record precipitation at these stations, and the precipitation sensors are about as accurate as you can get. Wind is a big problem with measuring rainfall because wind blows rain horizontally, sideways, diagonally, whatever. And so they put some specialized baffles around the rain gauge to ensure that it's getting, straight down rain as opposed to horizontal rain, which doesn't measure the same. So what do? They decide brilliantly that they're going to combine temperature and precipitation extremes into a new index. It is just absurd. I mean, no one has ever combined temperature and precipitation to produce a climate index. And for me, this seems like a knee-jerk reaction to what happened earlier, where NOAA was told, no more billion dollar disasters website, no more climate extremes $1 billion disasters tracking. Trump shut that down. Well, this looks exactly like that in a different form. And so it looks like they're basically coming up with something to lead policy and forget the science. They can create a hockey stick out of this thing easily if they want. And as you can see, the trend is up. It's meaningless. It's meaningless because precipitation and temperature are two separate things. They are not the same. They are not ever combined to make a climate metric, except here. Now, we were in touch with the author of this thing over at NOAA, and he says, oh, well, we got ahead of ourselves. We have a climate paper in review about this, peer-reviewed paper, but it hasn't been published yet. And so some people got a little bit ahead of the gun and put it up on the website. And he says they're going to take it down. Well, we'll see. But I think I'm going to have to send another letter to the White House to point out that, you told them to get rid of the billion dollar disasters. Well, here it is in a different way.
Yeah. Well, the NOAA is going to be a little bit different under Donald Trump than it has been for many decades, and especially under Barack Obama. So this might be the last one of these things that NOAA releases, at least in the next 3.5 years, that triggers you so much, Anthony. We can only hope, I guess.
Yeah, boy. Anyway, if you see this thing being cited somewhere, just beat it to death because it is a manufactured metric of no relevance.
Yeah.
What I find interesting when you look at, each of those things separately, pretty much only the warm and dry are actually increasing. It seems, just looking at it with my bare eyes here. But I'm curious as to where they're getting the dry extremes, because I haven't seen very much raw data on like drought and stuff that shows that it's increasing like this. So I'm not sure what this even is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're actually using the data coming from the weather station network, and so they're doing an aggregate average of the whole nation to come up with how much rainfall in a particular month or so forth, or a particular year, and so they're creating this from the data that's coming in, but where they're getting their comparison baseline metric, I'm not sure. It's not clear, even in the explanation we got from NOAA. A lot is unclear about it.
Yeah, well, here a quick question here before we move on to the next item here, Anthony. There's a question here from Stamot, who says, "Why do we even need an index? Couldn't you just report the maximums?"
Because this is an agitprop propaganda tool. That's all it is. With this particular metric, we can combine temperature extremes and precipitation extremes, which are not related to each other, and turn it into a new graph that looks even scarier. And look at it. They've already got the warming trend going on, or the worsening trend going on. That's all this is.
Yeah, this isn't even
science.
Yeah, it's not even comparing apples to oranges. It's comparing apples to armadillos. I mean, it's there's no relation at all.
Yeah.
All right. Great. All right, let's move on to our second item here today. We're going to take a little bit more time with this because I think it's worth it. It's kind of important. Actually, Donnie Kendall, the former host of Heartland Institute's In the Tank podcast, but the director of our Emerging Issues Center here at the Heartland Institute, actually alerted us to this this week. This was a post in LinkedIn by a man named Cesar Barboza. He is the CEO of New Life Power Services. Now, his business specializes in helping solar owners unlock their maximum, return on investment from aging solar systems. So, he would seem to be an expert on this, although perhaps he is biased. So you can take this with a grain of salt. But he obviously has experience in this field for a long time, and I have titled this section, "The Sunset for Solar. We Shall See." So I'll read this from his post. "A bold prediction no one wants to hear. Half of all commercial solar systems installed before 2016 will be underperforming or non-operational by 2030. The solar industry is obsessed with the future. Cutting-edge panels, bigger is better, sleek batteries, dazzling projections for new installs. But here's the reality we can't afford to ignore. A silent crisis is unfolding on rooftops across America, a crisis I've been tackling firsthand since 2012, traveling the country with SunPower to address some of the industry's most pressing system failures. Across the country, tens of thousands of rooftop solar systems, once hailed as the clean energy revolution, are quietly decaying. Not because the technology failed, but because the industry did. We rushed to install, we cut corners, we promised 25 years of performance, and then delivered systems that can't make it past 10. Here's what's killing them. Inverters are dying. Many are already out of warranty with no replacements available. Wiring and electrical infrastructure that was never designed for 25 plus years of exposure. Install quality? Forget it. An army of barely trained crews built the boom, and now we're paying the price. Maintenance? There was no plan. Just a contract, a handshake, and a hope it would all work out. This is not just an engineering issue. It's a financial one. Underperforming assets are generating less revenue than forecasted, while increasing the risk of electrical faults, fire hazards, and insurance claims. And here's the kicker. Almost no one is ready to deal with this wave of system failures. This is where the next frontier of solar energy lies, not in installing the next 100 gigawatts. It's rescuing the first 100 gigawatts. Revitalization, repowering, responsible end-of-life planning. The question isn't whether it's coming, it's whether we have the guts to face it. Are we going to keep pitching the dream or finally clean up the mess we left behind? Now, Linnea, before we get into a little bit more into this topic and about how the Inflation Reduction Act has subsidized all of this garbage with billions of our tax money, I wonder if you could, give me a reaction to that as somebody who's worked in the energy industry.
People have been saying it for years and years that no one's talking about end of life for these things, and the fact that many of these, solar panels and the super huge wind turbines don't get anywhere near the lifespan that they are supposed to get, or that the marketing companies tell you that they're supposed to get. What's annoying right now is that the bill that's going through Congress at the moment takes away the subsidies for individuals putting solar panels, or like the tax credits for individuals putting solar panels on their roof or whatever, but it keeps all the subsidies for the big corporations pushing these things. So nobody wants to fix this problem. It's getting worse and worse. You can't recycle these things without exorbitant cost. It's going to be a major issue way sooner than later, like this guy said. It's good to see someone from that industry talking about it, because usually they kind of hand wave it. But yeah, no, it's been, I don't know, for the last 10 years, I've been seeing on and off articles pop up about like, hey, these things are crashing out and dying and stuff, and we're just tossing them aside, and we really don't know what to do with them. Many of them, have been put into semi-permanent installations that, 30 years you can replace them and it won't be a big deal, but they're not making it 30 years. So what are you supposed to do? Most of the time they just leave them there until they get like a big, like a larger number of the panels dying, and then they go and replace them. So it's a growing problem.
Yeah, I love the comment here from Jerry Palmer that solar panels will last for centuries in a landfill. Right.
Well,
Very
it's
clever.
even worse than you think. Now, I came across a story earlier this week that this blows my mind, but it's been verified. Chinese kill switches found in U.S. solar farms. I've always said you cannot trust the Chinese. They will lie to your face and smile while they do it. I've had personal experience with this. And so what do? They put in kill switches. Why? Well, because we're becoming, in some cases, so dependent on these things to stabilize the grid or whatever fantasy they have. The Chinese can basically throw our country into disarray simply by running the kill switch on the solar farms and causing the grid to go dark. What a great time for an attack, huh?
Yeah.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, that's why we're talking about it on this program now, because at the time we were trying to talk about it, and the mainstream media did not cover these sorts of issues. They did not care about these things, and now they're starting to come to the fore, and we'll continue to cover it as we go forward. But as I mentioned earlier, the Inflation Reduction Act, which did not reduce inflation, was not designed to reduce inflation, and was in fact the Green New Deal under a cloak of secrecy, subsidizes this sort of thing. Now, right now, Donald Trump is trying to pass his big, beautiful bill, which does a lot of good if you're for lower taxes and for smaller government, perhaps. But what it does not really do, and what I think warrants being done, is complete repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act to get all these things out. But what we're finding out is that a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, despite all of the rhetoric, seems like it's going to survive. So, Andy, if you could put up on the screen on the slideshow, we have some tweets here that talk about this. This is from one of the good guys in the House of Representatives, Thomas Massey. He says, the big, beautiful bill, I think that's the wrong slide, but it's okay. He did tweet, though, that the big, beautiful bill ends solar tax credits for homeowners in 2025, but it keeps solar subsidies for corporations until 2031, which means homeowners will be seduced into leasing systems installed on their homes for companies who qualify for the subsidies. So much for that promise, getting rid of that. And then there's a second tweet. Here we go. Yeah. So Sarita asks Thomas Massey, what are you doing about that besides whining and throwing dirt on POTUS that you're so infantile? And Thomas Massey replies, I doubt POTUS even knows that Congress and lobbyists have written tax policy that will make it such that homeowners will be leasing solar panels from companies instead of buying panels to own. You're mad because I told the truth about this? Apparently she is. And then there's another tweet thread showing how we are not going to be getting rid of solar subsidies, it appears, in this new government. So you should actually definitely be following Alex on social media, and this thread is very good. I'll just hit some of the highlights so we can talk about it here as a group. Alex Epstein, he had said, why Congress's new budget should eliminate all Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits. 1, they are subsidies. 2, they promote inferior energy. And 3, they raise energy costs. And he says, if you're just joining this conversation about IRA subsidies, this is what you need to know. He says, deal breaker number 1, the overwhelming majority of the bill's savings are based not on truly ending subsidies now, but on energy promises of phase outs that start 4 years into the future and can be easily reversed by future Congresses. Obviously, 4 years into the future, Donald Trump is no longer in the White House. 2, multiple tax credits, including the most expensive and destructive solar, wind, ITC, and PTC, aren't being eliminated, only quote unquote phased out starting again 4 or more years from now. Hence, the overwhelming majority of the bill's quote unquote savings have no chance of happening in the near term. Now, Anthony and Linnea, I think obvious here that Tom Massey and Alex Epstein are right. What we get to experience in the destruction of the climate hysteria in our government and its policies has been great, because of November 2024. But it really feels like Trump, maybe he just doesn't realize this. I don't know. He's focused on his big, beautiful bill and on taxes, tax cuts. And now he's in the Middle East bringing peace there, or at least trying. But if we blow this chance to get rid of these subsidies and these crappy energy subsidies, crappy energy subsidized by us, it'll be with us forever. Just like Obamacare. We had our chance. John McCain went like that, and then that was it. We're stuck with Obamacare forever. I fear that that's happening now too.
Yeah, it's a bad bill.
unfortunately.
It's not doing the things that Trump says that it's going to do, and I don't think that he knows that it's been written this way. I might be being too charitable there, but I tend to think that Trump means things when he says them, and if he says that this bill is supposed to help in these areas and it's obviously not going to, then it's because he doesn't know that it's not going to.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the fact that these things were supposed to last 25 years and they don't. Well, you think about it. I mean, these things are stuck out in the weather 24/7, 365. The sun is beating down on the electronics, and it is a harsh environment. And they had no way of testing these things for longevity before they produced them. It was all, guess what? Model based. That's right. Solar longevity was based on computer models. And what's happened? Oh gosh, they failed terribly. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that just, it enrages me, triggers me, it's like written so that these things are phased out 4 years into the future. I mean, do it now. The Inflation Reduction Act is an infant. It's so little. So much of the money hasn't even been spent yet. It's just been, or they tried. They were shoveling billions out the door through EPA, between the election and when Donald Trump took the inauguration. Why can't you just do that? Why can't you just cancel it right now? It's like, even Obamacare, how long was it between the passage of Obamacare and then the infamous vote where John McCain killed the repeal of Obamacare? What was it? 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? I'd have to look it up, but it was not 6 months, which is what we have, basically right here. It's just crazy. It enrages me that this is how this works, that all of the gains of the scammers, of the energy and climate scammers are immediate and permanent, apparently. And any attempt to roll it back takes years and years and years. And as it was either Massey or Alex Epstein who pointed out, the corporate subsidies remain, but your personal subsidies go away. And so it just transfers, the grift from 2 places at once to just 1 place at once, which is not, to me, much of an improvement.
Nope.
All right. So that was my gym rant of the day. I didn't have as many gym rants on the Unitech podcast yesterday as normal. So, and plus the Archbishop of Ranterbury, Sterling Burnett, is not here. So somebody has to pick up the slack. All right. We'll move on to our next item here, which is I've titled Good, Not Bad Climate News. And this comes from our climate realism site, climaterealism.com, which you should be visiting every day. And this was a piece by Anthony Watts and Sterling Burnett, titled, The New Scientist is Flat Wrong. We live in a golden age thanks to a warmer climate. I'll read a bit here and then throw it to you, Anthony. In a recent article published in The New Scientist, quote, the everyday ways climate change is already making our lives worse. The author argues that, quote, climate change is already making our lives worse, citing a litany of supposed impacts from extreme weather, from increased food prices to disrupted sleep and longer commute times. This narrative is misleading at best and outright false in many instances. It ignores the substantial evidence that humanity is currently thriving in a period of unparalleled prosperity, health, and technological advancement. Contrary to the article's alarmist tone, data suggests that despite localized weather disruptions, global crop yields are at record highs, overall mortality rates from the climate-related events have decreased, and adaptive technologies have vastly mitigated potential risks. Now, again, Anthony, you and Sterling co-wrote this one together on climaterealism.com. Run us through why you wrote this and why a warmer climate is good for us.
Well, if you go through history and look at all these anecdotal things about humanity all through history, we've had the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period, the modern warm period, and then we've had, the cold ages, the dark ages, the little ice age, and so forth. Humanity has always done better when the temperature is warmer. And these periods of growth and prosperity prove it. And yet, these folks here, they look at this and saying, well, gosh, we're seeing worse storms, worse flooding, worse hurricanes, worse everything. But when you actually go down and look at the data, it's not true at all. And this is why I'm so upset about this new NOAA aggregated climate extremes index, this ACE index we covered earlier. This is just going to be another tool to drive people just like this who wrote this article, who don't pay attention to the alternate data, the real data. They look at what is being pushed in the narrative. And that ACE index that they're coming up with at NOAA is nothing but a driver to continue this sort of narratives. We're in a golden age. We've got the best standard of living ever in humanity. We've got easy access to transportation and energy and healthcare and food, stuff that humanity for most of its existence did not have, and we've got fantastic ways to communicate. I mean, virtually everybody who's not dirt poor has one of these things. And even some of the dirt poor people have those things because of Obama phones. So we're in a great period of history. Why do these organizations keep trying to tell us, climate is making our lives worse? It's just mind-boggling.
Yep. For sure. Yep. And I'm sorry, Andy, I screwed up your your layout for us today. But yeah, so definitely visit climaterealism.com. It's one of the Heartland Institute's websites. It's worked on daily by Anthony Watts, Sterling Burnett, and Linnea Lucan. So it's great counterspin to the alarmist narrative that is out there. We're going to be bringing on Roy Spencer here pretty soon, I hope. But first, I wanted to get to our meme of the week. Now, this isn't quite super timely, but it is typical of what happens around this time of year. For those of you just listening, this is from Wide Awake Media. Shared an image on Twitter, on X, I should say, and that it's that time of year again. So in 2017, you have a weather presenter with temperatures in the 30s Celsius all around Germany, and everything just looks normal. It's green, it's pleasant. And then in 2022, and the same is going on right now for sure, temperatures are actually lower than that, and it's climate alarmism everywhere with deep reds and oranges to show that everybody is burning up in the atmosphere, I guess, or something. So keep an eye out for that stuff.
Just last week, Jim, there was an alert put out by the Met Office in Britain for 28 degrees centigrade high temperatures, an alert. 28 degrees centigrade is 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit. What the hell?
Yeah, they were going crazy in the UK over, I think it was, the temperature was going to be 77, and it was like sending out heat warnings. It's crazy. All right. Well, as you can, hello, Dr. Roy Spencer. You popped in here.
Hey, Jim. Doing okay.
All right. So now we are ready to get to our main topic, and we are happy to welcome to the show this one, Dr. Roy Spencer. Let me give you a little background for those of you who are not familiar with him. But since 2001, Roy has been principal research scientist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He was a senior scientist for climate studies at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, where he and Dr. John Christy received NASA's Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal for their global temperature monitoring work with satellites. In fact, there's nobody in the world who knows this better than Dr. Spencer and Dr. Christy. Roy's work with NASA continues as the U.S. science team leader for the Advanced Microwave Scanning Radiometer flying on NASA's Aqua satellite. He's provided congressional testimony several times on the subject of global warming, and he's actually spoken at almost every one of the Heartland Institute's international conferences on climate change. So, Roy, again, thanks for being on today and for talking about what I think is a pretty important paper.
Oh, you're welcome, Jim. Good to be with you again. I think last time I was on with Anthony. I forget what we were talking about, but here we go again.
I'm sure it was great, and I'm sure it was important. But yeah,
Well, of
remember.
course.
So let's we'll set this up. I'm sure Anthony will be able to lead us through this better than I. But we'll start with just putting up a post from the University of Alabama, Huntsville, where you guys, you and Dr. Christy had announced the release of this new paper about the urban heat island effect, which we cover a lot on this channel, with the takeaway being that 65%, if I read that right, 65% of global warming is due not to carbon dioxide emissions, but the urban heat island effect.
Well, you have to be careful here.
All right.
And the words matter. So basically, it's that for the United States, because that's what our paper was about, was analyzing temperature data in the United States. What we found that since 1895, so that's a long time ago, since 1895, the total amount of warming we've seen in the United States at suburban and urban locations, 65% of that has just been due to the urban heat island effect, which is pretty substantial. Now, the method we use basically uses population density as a proxy. Okay, I mean, we calibrate it with hundreds of thousands of temperature measurements, but then because there are these data sets of population density that go back centuries, like all around the world, we wanted to work with population density first as a way to do this. So we translate growth in population, actually all around the world. We've tried it, elsewhere, but it was developed for the U.S. and found that, for the urban and suburban areas, 2/3 of the warming since the late 1800s is due to urban heat island. In other words, it would be there even without any global warming. That warming would be there. Now, the final caveat here is that is based upon the raw NOAA thermometer data. And that's something that Anthony knows a lot about. He spent a lot of time looking at raw data versus their so-called homogenized, adjusted data. I mean NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So there's questions about what do our results mean in terms of warming in the U.S., and that's not completely clear yet because all of our calculations, that 65%, is based on raw data, and our detractors will say, well, that raw data has problems with it, but to the extent that what's interesting about all this is that the raw data shows basically the same thing as the adjusted data. I think there's something wrong with their adjustments, and Anthony and I have discussed that before. I think in this venue, and there's actually some papers that are getting published out there now about how their adjustment procedure, NOAA's adjustment procedure of the thermometer data, is suspect. That you would think that it would make the urban sites look like rural sites, but it doesn't. It sort of blends them all together into a statistical soup, and that leads.
Speaking of soup, I've got a good analogy for that. If you have, let's say, 100 bowls of soup, and you've got 5 of those bowls of soup that are cool or lukewarm, and then you mix all the soup together, what do you got? You've got an aggregate bunch of hot soup that those 5 don't mean anything to the whole picture of the temperature for 100 bowls of soup.
Yeah, so I don't trust the official NOAA temperature data, and there's getting to be more researchers getting published out there now that are also pointing out that it has problems with it. And I'm frankly quite kind of surprised that we got our paper published, because I'm pretty sure one of the reviewers is actually one of the proponents of that homogenization strategy. So I think it was a pretty stand-up thing that person did to allow us to get this published.
Yeah. And the other thing is that we can't duplicate everything that NOAA does externally. They run this entirely on their own set of supercomputers and so forth. While they publish about how they do it, we've never really had the ability to run the code and test it externally. And that's a big, big thing, because do you really want to, trust your future, your economics, and your energy base based on computer code that you haven't been able to run a test on externally? That's a real
Yeah,
concern.
yeah, I don't know of anybody that's done that has tried to get a hold of the code and run it and do testing themselves. I'm not aware of anybody doing that. Maybe they have. You'd probably know better than I would.
Yeah,
But
well,
it's a problem. What they use is sort of a statistical black box. It's a mystery what happens in there.
that's true. And the problem with recreating it externally is a huge amount of cost to come up with a similar set of computers to be able to do that work. And so it's not something, the average researcher can just go and do. That's the real problem with this.
Right. But even if they could reproduce it, I got a feeling that there is something fundamentally wrong with the assumptions in their adjustment philosophy. And that's what this paper. It's 2003 paper by a Japanese researcher, last name Katada, and Ronan Connolly was one of the. In fact, maybe you had the link to it. You had the link to it up there, didn't you?
Yeah, I think Andy had that up there. Yeah.
Yeah, and what he talked about in that paper is urban blending, where what the methodology does is inadvertently, we hope inadvertently, makes the urban station, it blends the urbanization effect into the rural data rather than the other way around. So it's hard to say exactly what that stew of results produces in terms of something useful. It's
a hot mess. That's what it is.
It's still an open question, I think, of how much our land surface temperature data have been corrupted by the urban heat island, which brings up another thing that we found, which actually isn't new. It goes back to 1973, the original paper on urban heat island effect by Oke, O-K-E. I think he's Canadian, that showed that the biggest amount of warming you get is at very low population densities. It's when you go from wilderness to start moving people in is when a lot of the warming occurs. And I've thought about that. And I think it's because, once you start having people, you got to have infrastructure. You got roads, you got some parking lots, you got buildings, even if the population density is really low. And those things have a substantial, even half a degree or more, 1 degree Fahrenheit warming effect just from having, let's say, 10 or 20 people per square mile.
Yeah. Now I want to bring up one of the graphs from your paper. This one here is really telling because it quantifies the warming, not only on population density, but based in time. You said that the most effect happened at the beginning of the record. And you can see how quickly the urban signature climbed starting in 1880. And then it sort of, levels off a little bit. But the difference between the urban, suburban, the rural, and the middle of all of that is staggering in terms of temperature and can account for a good portion, like you say, about 65% of the warming in the United States.
And that's the warming since 1880. In other words, I set the 0 point for this plot in 1880. There's actually warming before that because, it didn't start with 0 population back in 1880 in the United States. So actually that all of those curves need to be shifted up a little bit, but it just depends on how you want to plot the data.
Right. And I want to compare this graph to the graph that I published in 2022 when I did my second surface stations report. And these are the differences between the stations that are perturbed versus compliant the ones that are away from humanity at least 100 feet versus the ones that have concrete and asphalt and heat exchangers and so forth right next to them. The official adjusted NOAA trend is 0.324 degrees centigrade per decade. The non-compliant stations all by themselves are 0.319, pretty close. But the compliant stations, and these are mostly rural, only have 0.204 degrees centigrade per decade. So clearly, there's a huge difference between the urban versus the non-urban, and the compliant stations versus non-compliant stations. And NOAA says, well, we adjust for this, but they always cite this homogenization algorithm. And as I pointed out, again, if you got 100 bowls of soup, and 95 of those bowls are hot soup, 5 of those bowls are cold or lukewarm soup, and you mix it all together in an homogenization process, you still end up with a hot mess. I can't see any way around the fact that the methodology that NOAA is using, also NASA GIS, is flawed, and they don't see it.
Well, or they choose not to see it because they get an answer that they like.
Well, this is actually really interesting, Dr. Spencer, because it actually reflects something that I've been seeing as I've been doing this independent project with the Heartland Institute, looking at state by state, like compiling our own climate reports state by state. And I've been finding that the least populated states, places like Montana and Utah and stuff, are the ones that have seen the most warming on their record compared to like Louisiana. And so I thought that was counterintuitive to what I would have thought, because they don't have as many urban centers that are as populated as other states. But if what your research is pointing to is right, then you should see more warming from the traditional.
It all depends on how much those stations grow in terms of population. They can have substantial warming even if they have a low population, depending on how much they grew. But a lot of those stations are rural and remain rural. And the other thing you got to remember is, there's spatial variability in these things, geographic variability, and how much it has warmed here versus there. Like you mentioned, Louisiana. Well, most of the southeastern U.S. has seen essentially no warming in the last 100 years, and that's even based on the official homogenized data. So yeah, and if you look in this desert Southwest, you get more warming there too. There's more warming in the West than there is in the East. But the question is all of it exaggerated?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, forgive me if this question is ignorant, because I'm not a climate scientist. But why are we using any temperature stations at all that are in urban and suburban areas if we're trying to determine what the global temperature or the the temperature trend in the United States over the last century is? Shouldn't they all be in rural areas, because that would be completely impossible to corrupt with any human activity?
Yeah, the trouble is when you start, when you try to get 80 or 100 or 120 years of data from a rural station, there's almost no stations that exist. The US has more stations than any place in the world. Europe, is sort of a second, because its history goes way back. But the Europe and the US are a pretty small fraction of the globe. So it's hard to get enough data for a long enough period of record to do what you're saying. I agree that would be probably the way to do it in the United States, and that's what Anthony has advocated. And I agree that if you can just get rural stations in the US, just forget about the others for global warming trends. Now, here's the problem that comes up. Most people live in urban areas, okay? And we keep hearing about new record high temperatures in cities, in US cities, right? Which I'm sure they are, record high temperatures. It just is, it's partly because of the urban heat island effect, yet it still is, advertised as climate change, right? And that's the thing that needs to be pointed out. And that's where we think our new methodology can help, is we can actually quantify the urban heat island effect by itself. And if we can show that warming in urban areas has been quite large, just because of the urban heat island effect, because we isolate the urban heat island effect, that's important for telling people what they're experiencing and to inform the public when they hear a new record high temperature for New York City. They need to start reporting that some part of that is just because of urbanization.
Yeah.
And you can see in this slide that we have of the globe, this was produced by Dr. Spencer about a year ago, if I recall correctly. And it shows the density combined with the urban heat island effect around the world. And so we have a significant density in the eastern United States, east of the Mississippi, and also in California and on the left coast. But look at places like India. It's always been known it's hot and sticky in India. Who wants to visit there? Well, it's true. The way that they've urbanized everything, you've got so many people packed in, it is warmer there. And as a result, these types of things can skew the global surface temperature record. And I would point out that Dr. Spencer's work in the satellite record shows a far less trend of temperature over the past 30 to 40 years than what the surface temperature record does. Now, I want to bring up the next slide, which is slide 11, which shows the United States. And you can see, and this is, again, a graph from Dr. Spencer, or a chart, or a map, whatever you want to call it. And it shows very clearly the population centers and their heat signatures. And this is not an infrared picture, but it looks almost identical to what you would get if you took an infrared photo of the United States from space with clear air conditions. It would look very much like this.
Yeah, an interesting thing about this is take a look at Florida and the whole Miami, Fort Lauderdale metroplex down through there. An interesting thing about Florida is that before air conditioning, virtually no one lived there. Miami was incorporated as a town a little over 100 years ago with a population of like 200 people. It blows my mind. And now look at it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And air conditioning has been a real boon for humanity, not just in the United States, but everywhere. I mean, think about people that live in places like Dubai. Would they be able to live there without air conditioning? Probably not.
Yeah.
Well, look at all the developments going on in Dubai, and now that's going to be used as proof of global warming, probably the urban heat island effect in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, there's something easy that people can do if they do live in the desert is walk around. And I think Anthony has pointed this out before. If you want to just give your neighbor or whoever you're arguing with about this a little demonstration of the urban heat island effect, you can walk on your driveway at night and then step off the driveway into the sand and see what the temperature difference is on the ground. It's significant because sand loses heat a lot faster than concrete or asphalt do.
Right.
And that is reflected. A couple of people in our comments are making good comments about nighttime temperatures. Nighttime minimum temperatures is something that across the board in states that I have looked at it's not so much that like daytime highs are getting higher. It's usually that nighttime lows are getting higher.
Yeah.
And that seems to be consistent with urban heat island effect, not so much like atmospheric global warming.
Yeah, that's been a common theme with the urban heat island is that it's mostly at night. But by morning, before the sun comes up, that's when you get peak warming compared to rural areas around the city.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's great about your research, Dr. Spencer, is that you are looking for signatures other than carbon dioxide for warming of the Earth. And it seems most government-funded scientists who seem to have a narrative first and research later seem to be always looking for that CO2 signature. Has anyone actually been able to quantify or at least credibly estimate how much human CO2 emissions have contributed to whatever global warming we have seen since the Industrial Revolution?
Well, another way of phrasing your question is, has anybody ever been able to demonstrate whether nature couldn't have caused some of the warming? And the answer is no. We really have no clue about what might have been going on in the last 100 years to cause warming. Well, like Anthony mentioned, you've got the little ice age, of hundreds of years ago. No one really knows what caused that, but it's warmed up. It started warming up without any help from humans. Why? Well, if that could happen back then, why couldn't it happen today? We don't know. So scientists basically just assume, well, we're just going to assume the climate system is forever and ever in a state of balance unless humans come along, which is sort of a weird way of looking at nature. But that's what they believe. And of course, that's where the money is, because the bigger a problem you can present this as to Congress, the more money you'll get out of Congress to do research, because that's where essentially all of the research money comes from, is from Congress. So the bigger the problem you can make this out to be, the bigger the research budget you're going to have. And, a lot of people now, like people my age, their entire career has basically been working on this problem because there's been money to work on it.
Yeah. Linnea, you mentioned people could experience the difference between asphalt, concrete, and grass themselves just by walking out in the evening onto their driveway. But I want to show you something else that you can do. Almost everybody now has a thermometer in their automobile. And back in 2008, on October 28th, I happened to be traveling through Reno, Nevada, and I did a transect of temperature using not just my car thermometer, but a specialized thermometer that I mounted on my system there. And if you will click on that graphic there, Andy, there we go. This is the results of that transect from north to south along Virginia Street in Reno, Nevada in the evening from 11:15 p.m. to 11:39 p.m. I had a GPS going on at the same time with my temperature data logger. And it's very clear there's a huge heat island right in the middle of downtown Reno. So where do they measure the temperature for climate? Well, at the airport, which happens to be right at, bring that back, right in the middle of downtown. Bring that back, please. Can you bring that? There we go. Thank you. Leave that up. So they measure the temperature at the airport, right in the middle of the runways there, right in the middle of that big red blob. And what happens with that data? Well, people like Climate Central use it to make claims that Reno is the fastest warming city in the year or city in the world thanks to climate change. Well, it's bogus. It's all because of this urban heat island effect.
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten in my car and started it up, and it's been sitting in a hot parking lot all day, and it says that it's 92 degrees outside. And then when I start driving and it's actually not sitting there getting baked by the same piece of black asphalt for the last 3 hours, suddenly it shows the real temperature, which is probably 82. So it's like, it's funny how that works.
Yeah. And how climate science can't see this and resolve it, I don't know. And maybe, as Dr. Spencer said, they choose not to.
Yeah, well, there's no financial motivation for doing anything different.
Human beings respond to incentives. It doesn't matter if you're a scientist or a chef or you own a pizza shop. Humans respond to incentives, and the incentives are all there for an alarmist narrative. Roy, I just want to give you one last opportunity to kind of maybe tie a bow on this paper and your research before we send it over to our wonderful audience for some questions.
No, just go ahead with the questions. I don't have anything else.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being with us. We appreciate that. Linnea, go ahead. Take it away. Oops. Oh, there she is.
There it is. Okay.
Almost forgot the drop. Oops.
Dr. Spencer's dropped out of the thing. Okay, there we go. All right. So our first question comes from Chris Nisbet, who asks, could Dr. Spencer please send a copy of this report to heads of Commonwealth countries we're still infected with the climate crisis disease?
Well, there's a link on my blog to the paper itself. You don't have to buy the paper. We paid to have it available to everyone. And there's a link at drroyspencer.com that anybody can go to and read the the gory details if they're so inclined.
Thank you. And I want to highlight this nice comment from Big Discussion 76, who says, I need to do a better job following you guys. Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. Okay. Redneck Screwloose asks, could Spain and Portugal be a test of those kill switches? I don't think that's the case here.
From the solar stuff we covered earlier, you mean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a problem associated with inertia of the grid as opposed to a kill switch. The kill of the grid happened because protection mechanisms kicked in.
Yep. All right. David Murphy asks, this also has to do with the subsidies and stuff that we talked about earlier in the show. They said, are they forced to delay the removal of subsidies on corporates or corporations due to contractual issues? Maybe that could be part of it, but Trump doesn't seem to be too worried about that kind of stuff on other things. So I'm not sure. Let's see. Samot says, are there any graphs showing only deaths by extreme weather by year, ignoring the weather itself? I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, how do you make a graph of extreme weather by ignoring the weather? I don't get that.
Yeah,
we do have a very nice graph on climateataglance.com. If you visit there and look at some of the topics we have about extreme weather, you will find a graph that very clearly shows that extreme weather related deaths have dropped dramatically, almost to near zero compared to what they used to be over the last century.
Yep. Dr. Spencer, has the Heat Island data been released to the fake news media, and has anyone aired that data? So has your paper made the mainstream yet?
Oh, not that I'm aware of. My first request for an interview is actually right after this. Well, other than your interview, but with a mainstream news outlet out of DC, and that's the first one that I'm aware of. Yeah, we haven't been getting any calls.
Well, your paper doesn't say we're all doomed. That's why.
Well, that might be part of it.
Okay, this is a question for Anthony. Bob asks, Anthony, why does it matter what climate model is used when increases in temperature drop to almost nothing for a given increase in CO2 at this point?
Well, I'm a little unclear on the question, but the bottom line is that yes, there is a logarithmic effect to carbon dioxide saturation in the atmosphere versus temperature. The more carbon dioxide that you add, the less the temperature increases. And so a doubling of CO2, heaped on another doubling of CO2 doesn't make a vertical, or not a vertical, but a linear sharp trend like that. It's a slow curve. And we're almost at the saturation point for the effect of carbon dioxide and temperature in the atmosphere. So as far as which climate model is used, well, it basically depends on whether they treat that particular known piece of science honestly or not. Some of them, in the early days, looked at it linearly, and which was not true. Others, like RCP 8.5, treat it linearly, but we found out that there's not enough fossil fuels available on the planet to burn to get to the projections that they created. So, climate models have a lot of problems, and but they, as Jim pointed out, they provide those incentives. We've got this terrible thing happening in the future. So look at this graph. We need more money to study it. That's the whole thing. Follow the money.
Yep. And Dr. Spencer, Samot asks again, does the raw data have a margin of error? And how does that affect that 65% number?
Well, the raw data, I guess there's all different kinds of errors involved in the raw data. There's weather errors, the difference, because we use the difference between a rural station and a nearby urban station, and we look at the temperature difference. Well, there's a lot of things that can impact that temperature difference, and that's why we have to average tens of thousands of these matchups together in order to get what the average signal is. So what we're quantifying is the average signal. Those plots that we showed, where it showed, Miami hotspot and San Diego hotspot and Chicago, those are averages based on, many stations, like in the eastern U.S. or in the western U.S. and they aren't necessarily accurate for any given location. So yeah, there isn't a good answer to this question. Do the raw data have a margin of error? Yeah, they have some pretty large errors, and that's why we have to average a whole lot of data together to get out this small signal, because our urban heat island calculations are over all weather conditions, okay, including rainy days when there's basically no urban heat island effect, or cloudy, windy days when there's essentially no urban heat island effect. We didn't correct for that at all. It's the average over all weather situations. So yeah, it's a valid question. What's the margin of error? The answer is there's all kinds of errors in those data, as Anthony well knows, and I can't give you a number.
One thing I'd like to point out about the way temperature is measured in the United States is that when it's measured manually by an observer, they take the reading and they will put down, for example, let's say 96.4 degrees Fahrenheit or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the human temperature. They round that to the nearest degree Fahrenheit and then report the nearest degree Fahrenheit back to NOAA. And so some of the precision is lost in the fact that they do this rounding. And so there's that built right into the data to start with.
Yeah, and this is another question. I guess both of you could probably respond to this, but this is from Guffpot, who says, do we need to assume the raw data error is systematically biased in any one direction? If not, we should just be using the raw data.
Okay, that's a good point. And this is one of the issues that we have, is that the measurement, the strategy has not been the same for the last, say 100 years or more. They've changed instrumentation. A lot of these instruments have gotten moved from one location to another. They used to use liquid and glass thermometers, whether mercury or alcohol. And then they switched to electronic thermometers of various different, this is something Anthony knows a lot about because he builds weather stations. But that's the problem, is that for the long-term record, most people say you can't use the raw because whenever there were changes in sighting or instrumentation, that introduced biases, systematic biases, as the question is phrased here. There's a systematic bias that can go in different directions. And that's what homogenization is supposedly supposed to fix. And that, Anthony and I don't believe it actually does. So yeah, there's an argument that we can't use the raw data. Although some people say, based on homogenization, the adjusted data probably aren't any better than the raw data at this point.
Yeah, and then there is one thing that happens between the raw data and before you get to the homogenization stage, and that is they apply a time of observation adjustment. And this is a real big positive systematic bias in the temperature data. Now, this particular adjustment was designed to eliminate a potential weather-related measurement problem, whereby, let's say, for example, you normally take the temperature at 7 p.m. That's the observation time, right?
Now, this is so to clarify that this is the maximum and minimum for the day. So the question is, related to the maximum. When do you take the temperature of the daily maximum, the daily minimum?
Right, exactly right. And so what I was getting to is that, let's say you're looking for the maximum temperature of the day, and you measure it at 7 p.m. and the maximum temperature for the day, when you look at the thermometer that records that at 7 p.m., might be 65 degrees. Okay, that seems reasonable. But you happen to be in the warm area where a warm front is coming through. Particularly this happens in the Midwest and the Ohio Valley and places like that. You get this warm front coming through, and let's say it comes through at 8 p.m. Well, all of a sudden the temperature goes up to 70 degrees. Is that the high temperature for the day? No, it gets lost. So what happens is that you end up with this unintentional weather event. These weather events are so few and far between, they don't really make a whole lot of difference in the whole set of measurements. But the application of trying to fix it actually makes it worse. And that's what NOAA doesn't seem to understand.
Yeah. Roy, I know you have another interview coming up. How much longer can you stick with us?
A few minutes.
Okay.
Okay, great. We have some good questions. I want to respond to this question from Gerard Marsh because it's kind of a physics question in general, and I understand where the confusion is here. So I want to address it. He says, given that the gases in the atmosphere equate to 100%, which gas is decreasing to allow for an increase in CO2? I would say you have kind of a wrong conception of how gases exist in the atmosphere. I don't think it's like a cup that you can fill with 100% filled with water and then it starts overflowing as you continue adding to it. The atmosphere, when they say all of the gases equate to 100%, the pie can expand. It's not a fixed amount of gas in the atmosphere. Did I do an okay job at explaining that, or you guys can take over?
Well, yeah, that's an important point, and it's true. But it is also true that when we burn fossil fuels and CO2 is created, it uses up a little bit of the oxygen. So there is a trade-off where to make more CO2, you get rid of some of the oxygen. Now that sounds like a bad thing, except that there is so much oxygen in the atmosphere that it has virtually no impact on the total amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Right. So there is a little bit of give and take between oxygen and CO2.
You may remember, I think it was a couple of shows back, we had a headline in the Crazy Climate News that we're going to run out of oxygen in like 1 billion years, that was the latest thing from the media, and their danger, Will Robinson thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. One of the funny things about that is, some people are concerned about the oxygen getting used up, for more CO2. And what they don't realize is that they undergo a bigger decrease in oxygen when you climb the stairs from one level of a building to the next level.
Alrighty. So from nothing.
I got a journalist that's pestering me, so I need to go.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. All right.
Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Okay. Do we want to keep trying to answer some of these questions ourselves as long as they're not ones targeted at
yeah.
I like the way he ended that. A journalist is pestering me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I was gonna say give him hell, but actually just give him the truth, which they'll think is hell. So I'm sure that's what he's going to be doing.
Alrighty. Well, I hope that our audience enjoyed that. We certainly did. Dr. Spencer is a wealth of knowledge. So I'm going to make sure I don't grab ones that are just for him, but I think we might be able to answer a lot of these. So this is a good question from Bob Johnson, who says, haven't heard about temperature data on Lake Michigan. What of other Great Lakes? So is there a kind of water temperature station recording method?
Yeah, there's lots of buoys in these Great Lakes, and as far as the temperature data, I don't have any direct knowledge of it. So I don't know. I can't really comment on the question. I just don't have any background in it. All I know is they do have temperature monitoring for the Great Lakes in all of them.
Yeah, it's got to be out there because you can go on like the weather on any weather website and see what your local water temperatures are. If you live on the coast or if you live by a big lake, you can usually get that data. So it's out there. I'm just not sure if anyone's compiling it into a time series. So let's go. Okay, this is from Nothing As It Seems, who says, do we know how much the warm air from rising out of cities overnight is echoing daytime warming? I'm not.
What? I don't get that. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what that question means.
Is it an equivalent? I'm trying to think of how to rephrase this correctly. Nothing As It Seems. If you can rephrase the question and post it again, then we'll come back to it. Let me find a different one in the meantime. Let's see. I'm not sure what Ed Reed is talking about here, but he says it would be interesting to know how large the effects of AWAS and ASOS stations are on urban heat island.
Well, I would say that they're pretty pronounced. for a couple of reasons.
What are those,
Number one,
Anthony?
well, the AWOS is an automated weather station, and an ASOS is an automated surface observation station, and both of them are deployed at airports mostly around the United States. And they do measure temperature relatively accurately because they have, electronic sensors that are calibrated, and they have, a pretty decent temperature shield. But the problem is they're right in the middle of airports and urban centers. And so it kind of follows along with what Dr. Spencer has found. Much of that data that he compiled actually comes from AWOS and ASOS stations. So yeah, they do have a significant effect on the total warming over the past century.
Okay, great. Let's see. Chris Nesbitt asks, please tell me that the estimated readings from those ghost stations are not included in the homogenization.
I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. They are.
Oh, that's pain. Okay.
I know. It's just like and for people that don't know what this is, let me just step back a moment and explain this. Ghost stations have been identified, hundreds of them, not only in the United States, but also in the UK, where they were run by a private observer, some guy that had a farm. Old MacDonald had a farm. He measured weather, recorded temperature. And old MacDonald dies, or the farm gets sold, or whatever. And so the station gets closed. Well, NOAA seems to be far more interested in a continuity of the record than they are the accuracy of it. So what do? This homogenization process fills in the blanks. That missing station, gets filled in by stations all around the area. And so it comes up with a fake set of temperature data for that missing station, because we like consistency more than we like accurately. We're NOAA, and we're here to help.
You're not upset with them at all, Anthony.
No.
No. Okay, so this is a good question. Is it possible to separate the data into day and night?
That's a black and white question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is possible, but it would just be a complete and utter pain. What we usually do to estimate whether you're recording a day or a night temperature typically is to just look at those minimums, because most of the time minimums are going to occur at night unless some like major weather system comes through and crashes your temperatures. So most of the time I think that's what we're doing is estimating it based on minimum versus maximum daily temperature. The data from the ground stations is going to be correlated to time. But I don't think anybody's mapped it out that way.
None of these stations, they don't record at these stations, particularly the manually operated ones, at what time the high temperature or the low temperature occurred. They just simply note that we wrote down the high and the low at 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. or wherever their observation time is. They don't have any record of when it occurred.
Well, Anthony, I just want to ask you real quick. I mean, if the daytime or if a day's low temperature is rising, who cares? I mean, does that really matter? Does that have any adverse effect on humanity, let alone nature? If 25 or if 40 years ago, the average low temperature in northern Illinois in May was 50 degrees and now it's 54 degrees. Does that matter? Does that have any measurable negative impact on nature that you know?
Well, go ahead, Leah.
No, Anthony, you can go.
Okay, well, there are effects. For example, it helps with the growing situation. If you're planting flowers or crops or whatever it might be, having a higher nighttime temperature than you had 50 years ago is benefits. And what's important to note is most of the global warming that has been observed, whether it's in the United States or the world, happens in the low temperature. We have less cool nights than we used to. And this is because the infrastructure releases the heat that's absorbed during the day from sunlight into the air at night and prevents the air from cooling as much as it normally would have. There's also a carbon dioxide component because at night, the infrared long wave radiation that goes out to space from the ground as the ground cools is impeded somewhat in its pathway to space. It gets bounced around by the CO2 molecules a little bit. And so it also impedes the cooling at night, just a little bit. Not as much so as the effect we get from asphalt and concrete.
Yeah, I will say the only detriment in that case that I can think of is when it comes to like northern fruiting trees, like apples and blueberries and pears and stuff like, fruits like that. They do need a certain number of frost days in order to produce fruit the following year. So that would be something I could conceivably see, but I'm not sure that it's like 2 degrees Fahrenheit over 100 years is going to be the point that, makes that fruiting pattern disrupted. I'm not sure that it's actually showing up in the data. What we do see is earlier onset of budding on trees. I think that's seems to be pretty clear in much of the northern hemisphere, is that spring is coming earlier.
Yeah.
It's different depending on where you are in the country. And that's part of the thing that makes this whole entire issue complicated, is that it really depends on topography. It depends on how close you are to the equator. It's different, so global average temperature doesn't have global average effects necessarily.
Right. And as we
as
covered
Dr.
on
Curry says, it's a wicked problem.
Yeah. And as we covered on this show, a lot of that nighttime warming is due to the urban heat island effect, which is localized more or less to the cities and the suburbs.
Yeah. So here's a question that's kind of related to this, which is Terry Barnes asks, I've read that corn plays a significant role in raising nighttime low temperatures because of how much water an acre of corn transpires into the atmosphere. Is this a factor?
Exactly. And this is something that you can measure. It's been measured in places like Iowa and other places in the Midwest. You're right. Corn takes water out of the ground, and because it's got a large leaf surface, the evapotranspirates it into the air. So the air is more humid than it would be without corn because of that process. And as anyone knows, when you have a warm, humid night, the temperature doesn't drop as much versus a cold or a warm, dry night. And this is easily observed as you look at the temperature differences on any given day, particularly in the spring and the summer, at the high and low in Atlanta, Georgia, versus the high and low in Phoenix. Phoenix will have temperatures that plummet at night, down to 45 degrees, whereas Atlanta might get down to 65, given the same kind of conditions. So, yeah, that extra humidity that's been evapotranspirated by corn does have an effect of keeping the local temperature at night higher than it normally would.
Yep. All right. How many more do you guys want to do? These are really good questions again. So I'm happy. I'm very thankful to all of our audience for asking these good questions. I love the science heavy questions. I know we're a policy organization, but it is fun to do the science stuff. Let's see. This is a question about temperature rounding again. Miles Schumacher says, I have a question that has always concerned me with rounding in the National Weather Service. They always round a temp ending in half a degree up instead of to the even number. Okay. Doesn't that add a positive bias to the data set?
Yes, a small one, 0.1 degrees.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, this person asked a question for Dr. Spencer that I didn't see earlier, but we might address this. Aren't we technically in an ice age already?
No, we're in an interglacial ice age. That's down the road. And right now, there's the tilt, the precession of Earth's rotation, orbit, all that stuff is conspiring to put us into a new ice age in a few thousand years.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about the ice age cometh.
Oh, it's never too early to panic, Linnea.
Yeah,
we all know that.
I guess if you're concerned about the next ice age, then I would put in enough food to last a couple thousand years. So, let's go. This is a interesting question. I don't know if anyone would be able to answer this question, and this is based on temperature effects of increased biomass. David Murphy asks, has the amount of heat generated by 8 billion people been calculated, seeing as population itself has massively increased, or is it insignificant?
Actually, I think Dr. Spencer did a calculation on that a few months back. And he came up with an answer that equated to something on the order of like, we reached like somewhere between a 65 and 100 watt light bulb in terms of how much heat would generate. But when he looked at it in the larger scheme of things, the total heat signature of the atmosphere, it wasn't a significant amount.
All righty. Polly Hervonen wants to know if how often temperature instruments are calibrated because there is drift in their measuring. Are they ever calibrated, Anthony?
Probably not.
Yes and no. The ASOS stations at airports are routinely calibrated, and that's because they're monitored and controlled by the FAA, not NOAA. And the FAA insists that we have to have accurate temperatures for the runways so that things like density altitude can be properly calculated. So yes, the FAA does go in and calibrate these things on a regular basis. As far as the thermometers that are part of the cooperative observer network that are in people's backyards, farms, police stations, whatever, no, they don't go calibrate those things. I've been out talking to observers saying that they haven't seen anybody from the National Weather Service for years. And they've got this broken thing on their one. I remember vividly a place called Happy Camp, California. The observer there pleaded with me, can you get the National Weather Service to come out here and fix this latch on my max min thermometer, because you had to spin it and rotate it, and there was a metal latch to lock it in position, and that had broken. And this is a place that was serviced by Sacramento, and the drive between Sacramento and Happy Camp is 5.5 hours, and so they never see anybody out there. And so, yeah, they don't calibrate these things.
Here's a question from DJ Bo, a longtime viewer, who says, if a station is missing and gets homogenized, how many of these inputs have also been homogenized? As in, I think what he's saying is, if there's no if it's a ghost station, is it that every single time it takes a temperature measurement, it's just a homogenized temperature that's going into the data set, like pre-homogenized?
Yeah, it's always, when it's missing, everything that ghost station report is a homogenized temperature. It's a fabrication.
Okay. And then Bob Johnson asks, he says he saw a post about increased cloud cover. One, is it true that there is an increase in cloud cover? Two, what's causing it? And are there impacts to temperature?
Well, there's two schools of thought on this. I've seen reports of there's more cloud cover and there's less cloud cover. It's an open question at this point.
All righty. And then Mike O says, aren't all the plants and trees replenishing oxygen? Yeah. So this is one of the things that climate models have a really hard time taking into account, is the fact that there are also, hundreds of different geologic processes that consume oxygen or that consume carbon dioxide and other gases from the atmosphere being exchanged. And so it's crazy hard to predict what exactly is coming in and out of our atmosphere. So it's so complicated. Just creating certain types of rocks consumes like notable amounts of gases. So
All right. Well, that'll do it for today's show with so many great questions and answers. I want to thank Anthony Watt, Senior Fellow of the Heartland Institute, and of course, Linnea Lucan, Research Fellow for Energy and Environment at the Heartland Institute. And we really want to thank our guest for today, Dr. Roy Spencer. Second time he's been on the program. It's been a big gap between those two visits. We'll have to shorten that for next time. Thank you very much for being on the show, Dr. Spencer. Always visit climaterealism.com, where you can get the counterspin to the media alarmism on the climate. Go to climateataglance.com. And also look for the Climate at a Glance app on your Android or iPhone, where you can get the truth and the data that you can use in any arguments you may have with an alarmist out there in the world. Always visit What's Up With That, one of the best climate websites in the world. Always visit heartland.org, where you can subscribe to the Climate Change Weekly newsletter and also keep up with what we're doing here at the Heartland Institute. Again, thank you, audience, for being part of this. We had more than 3,000 people watching this stream live today. We just keep growing and growing, keep bringing people to watch this show with you. And I hope you had a good time. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.